The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is my favorite Zelda. It is a very dense game dripping with atmosphere, and is filled to the brim with mysteries. Where did Majora's Mask come from? Why is the Triforce depicted being licked? What's the deal with the aliens? Around every corner is the sensation that there is more to the story than is being told to us. This makes it ripe for theories. But I've never made a theory video because I would just be reciting what's already been said by other people. Today, however, I think I am onto something about the Happy Mask Salesman that doesn't seem to have been covered before. At least not like this. Before we go on, I would like to state clearly that I am not a Zelda historian. I know plenty about the franchise, but I do not have every little bit of lore memorized, so take that into account. Now, let's follow the long trail of logic I've gone down. The Happy Mask Salesman first appeared in Ocarina of Time with a much smaller role, simply selling masks for a side quest. The masks he sells don't do much except get different reactions from people, with the exception of the Mask of Truth, which lets you talk to gossip stones, and the lesser-known effect of the Bunny Hood, keeping enemies from spawning in Hyrule Field at night. In Majora's Mask, however, he has come into possession of the powerful titular relic only to be mugged by the Skull Kid who is then possessed by it. The Happy Mask Salesman tells Link he must leave in 3 days, which is coincidentally when the Skull Kid will drop the moon on Termina during what would normally be the Festival of Time. At the end of the game, you go inside the world of the moon and meet 5 kids, 4 wearing the boss masks and the 5th being Majora. It is common knowledge now that these kids share their faces with the Happy Mask Salesman, which raises a lot of questions. The kids mostly talk very cryptically about the nature of oneself and the disguises we wear, with Majora framing the last battle as a simple children's game of good guy versus bad guy, with you being the bad guy. After you defeat them and the world is saved, the Happy Mask Salesman collects the mask and departs with a speech about friendship. But what in the hell is he? He is a bizarre character and he clearly has information he's not giving us, but I think we can deduce a lot of it based on context clues. I couldn't find any confirmation, but it is generally believed the Happy Mask Salesman is modeled to look like Shigeru Miyamoto. But I think we all collectively acknowledged that as a simple nod to him and then discounted it as meaning anything else, but I think the parallels run deeper than his looks. When Eiji Aonuma came to Miyamoto requesting to make a new game, Miyamoto gave him the strict deadline of 1 year, 1/4 of the previous game's production cycle. Having Ocarina of Time's engine to work with made development easier, but it was still a hectic project, with the deadline constantly looming over them like the moon in the game. In fact, this frustration made it into the game in the form of the construction workers, with some of their dialogue actually being about making the game itself. The Happy Mask Salesman gives Link the task of recovering Majora's Mask with only a few days to do so. This is completely unreasonable, but he simply says, "This should be no problem for someone like you," indicating some knowledge of Link's past adventure. In real life, this has the same meaning. Having just made Ocarina of Time, creating Majora's Mask should be easy as far as Miyamoto was concerned. There are also comments that can be found saying that he can be scary when he is angry. Now honestly, this could apply to anyone, but if the Happy Mask Salesman really is him, then that comment pairs very well with the scary mood shifts that he goes through. Also, as a mask salesman, what he sells people is the ability to live as someone else. This can easily be applied to video games, and one of the masks he is carrying is of Mario. Now, I don't think that he is Miyamoto in-universe, but I do think that being modeled after him has real implications for the game as a whole. The more I thought about the game through this lens, the more it just made sense to me. For instance, the Moon Children are just copies of him, right? Ignoring the in-universe lore explanation, let's go down another thread. The child wearing Majora's Mask has none of the gravitas that the mask displayed previously. His childlike demeanor is one of the things that makes this section so off-putting. But the thing he does that is most worth mentioning is reducing the final battle to simply good guy versus bad guy. For all the mysteries in Termina, for all the complex stories, it all comes down to good versus evil, with no real answers given. I think this also relates to Miyamoto. You see, he doesn't seem to like complex stories. See, Twilight Princess was supposed to get a sequel similar in style to Majora's Mask, but he forced it to be downgraded to Link's crossbow training. He also refused to let them at least give it an interesting story for some reason. Not just a one-off thing, in Mario Galaxy most of the game's deep lore is told via storybook in a side room that is completely optional. Well, this was done to kinda sneak the story past him. The man responsible for that was Yoshiaki Koizumi, who wrote the story of Link's Awakening when he was tasked with writing the manual. He was a director for Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask as well. Here's the most relevant quote in relation to that from an interview he did. "You're right, EAD doesn't tend to focus on the big story in most of their games, but I was the one coming up with scenarios just on my own ever since the time of Link's Awakening. But even at that time, I felt like I came up with this entire scenario and a backstory for Link, but nobody really seemed to care. They were always saying, let's not try to push the story forward too much. So I would sort of try to find sneaky ways to get it in without them noticing too much. For example, I always liked the idea of you coming upon another character and hearing little bits of conversation that slowly begin to reveal different parts of the story. And that was the way that I tried to work on Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. A lot of the EAD games that do seem to have a lot of story, a lot of that came from my influence, but those are aspects of the games that Miyamoto wasn't nearly as fond of and occasionally didn't like." I'll link the whole article in the description so you can read it yourself, but basically it just confirms what I thought. Getting deeper lore into your game is a constant battle with him, which makes his Moonchild characterization of good versus bad make all the more sense, especially with those roles being weirdly reversed. He doesn't see what he's doing as wrong, he's just trying to do his job, but the way he runs things can make it difficult to express your creative vision. As an example of storytelling through side dialogue, there's a small theory that I personally take as fact. In Ocarina of Time, one of the masks you can wear is a Gerudo mask. If you talk to someone in Castletown, they'll tell you how Gerudo women will sometimes come to town looking for a husband. If you talk to Talon wearing it, he says it looks like his wife and then quickly takes it back. If you talk to Nuburu while wearing it, she'll say it looks like her before quickly taking it back. I take these obscure scraps of dialogue to point to the secret that the conspicuously red-haired Malon is a Gerudo, likely the daughter of Nuburu, but left with Talon by her mother because of the conflict with Ganondorf. From what I've read, this is exactly the kind of thing that was routinely snuck under Miyamoto's nose, and the fact that it is discovered by wearing a mask sold by his in-game counterpart makes it very interesting to analyze. But back to Majora's Mask. One last note that I want to point out, which may just be a coincidence, is that the name Miyamoto means base of the shrine. And where does the Happy Mask Salesman spend most of the game? Underneath the clock tower, which is very much a shrine, or a cultural equivalent. Again, maybe just coincidence, but an interesting one. Okay, so him being a stand-in for Miyamoto makes sense thematically, but what does that mean for the character himself? Well, it would likely mean that he is more than just a weird guy, but plays a much larger, pivotal role. From here on, it is just speculation, but I think that his true nature has been staring us in the face the whole time. You see, this is not Majora. It's Majora's Mask. That's right, I think that the Happy Mask Salesman is Majora. First, there's the obvious connection with the Moon Children, which may or may not be real, but let's look at all the traits we take for granted from him. First off, he knows what's happened to you at the beginning, seeming to even know what Link has done in Hyrule, judging from the unwarranted confidence he has in him. Second, he teaches you the Song of Healing, a magical tune that can create magical masks by either removing a curse or putting a spirit within the mask. The implications of that are their own discussion, but we'll move on for now. The point is, how did he learn this song? Where does it come from? Third, when he teaches you the song, he does so on a giant piano he materializes out of nowhere. Now I know, Link does this all the time, but it's important to remember that all his equipment is treated this way. It's just a standard game mechanic. But we shouldn't be so quick to use that explanation on the Happy Mask Salesman. Fourth, the way he moves is just wrong. He instantly switches between poses and facial expressions, and they're overly dramatic, like he's doing a performance. Fifth, despite having zero patience, reacting as if you're wasting time even if you only just started, he seems to know about the time loop. If you allow the moon to fall, it resets time minus any equipment you may have gained. It then displays the famous line, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" which indicates that you're starting back at the beginning. Creepy, but understandable. But the very next line is, "How did you do?" He knows that time has reset, and yet he doesn't seem to know the finer details. I hypothesize that he is the one saving you, but that he is only powerful enough to do just that. In order to reset time while maintaining different changes, such as equipment you've gained, you need the help of the Goddess of Time. This works well with my personal headcanon, which is that once you beat the game, the Goddess of Time collapses all the events you've gone through into one timeline. This way everyone gets their closure. It's just the only way that makes sense to me, but that's another topic. Sixth, there is a minor detail I want to point out that just denotes his station. He wears purple, which is a classically royal color. The only other characters in the game that wear purple that I can think of are Mayor Dotower, Cafe, the Poe Collector, and Ego Stuakana. Hey, Future Jess here. In the course of pulling footage for the game, I found that in person, Ikana's cape is more like reddish. It's kind of muddy and hard to tell, but maybe it's just because it's like supposed to be old and tattered and faded out. But I'm just acknowledging it's not quite purple. I did find some other examples. Cremia's dress, I believe, has got a purple tint to it, but I do think the trend still stands. Mayor Dotower is an aristocrat, being the town's mayor, and Cafe is also an aristocrat, being his son. The Poe Collector is an entirely different bag of worms to get into, but his clothing looks like royal garb and features the Ikana crest. In Ocarina of Time, it has the Triforce. And lastly, Ego Stuakana is a literal king. You don't get more royal than that. This just adds to the idea that the Happy Mask Salesman is more than just a traveling merchant, although he could just be a very successful one. It is worth noting that purple is prominently featured in the color scheme of Majora's Mask as well. There's also the name Majora. I thought that it was just Japanese for something, but it's not. It's similar to the word for witch, but it's not quite right. Also, it is written in katakana. Japanese uses 3 writing systems: hiragana, which is more flowy, katakana, which is more rigid, and kanji, which is not an alphabet but a collection of pictures that represent concepts. Katakana is most commonly used for foreign words, and Majora is actually a Latin name meaning the greater. It's also a feminine name, but that's not a rule. I think I looked over this simple explanation because I usually only see this word used in reference to female anatomy, but that has no bearing on the name itself. Hey, Future Jess again. Don't mind my voice, I'm very sick. But in the course of the video, I discovered something again. There's an old interview where the art director Takaya Imamura said that he created the name Majora, which, by the way, in the not the kanji, but in the katakana, is pronounced Mujura, by combining the movie title Jumanji with his own name. Oh well, but the concept of there being a greater entity or another half still makes sense to me because, like, it had to come from somewhere, you know, especially given with what we've seen from the other parts of the game, like the Deku mask, how it comes from the Deku kid that, like, died. You see him at the very beginning of the game. But doesn't matter, just acknowledging the correction in the video. Moving on. But if there is a greater, then there must be a lesser, right? Not that there is literally an entity called Minora, but thematically it shows that Majora is just part of something. And I think that the Happy Mask Salesman is the greater part. His powers are limited in scope, but you can't deny their immenseness if he is able to reset time in any capacity. Also, it may not be referring to power, but personality, as in he is the true being, and the mask, no matter how powerful, represents only a facet of him. This would make sense given that the mask is very single-minded. The final boss almost spells it out for us. First, there is Majora's Mask, acting of its own will. Then there is Majora's Incarnation, where it takes on a humanoid shape that it can move around in. And then there is Majora's Wrath. And there it is. The Happy Mask Salesman can be angry, but he is defined by his constant smiling demeanor. Under this theory, the dark side of his power has been sealed within the mask. He claims that Majora's Mask was used in ancient rituals, and there is strong reason to believe that it was discovered in the boss chamber of the Stone Tower, but the exact nature of those events is unclear. It doesn't matter though, because it can just as easily be true that it was used in ancient rituals and originally came from him, and now he has recovered it only to be robbed by the Skull Kid. It is debatable that he allowed himself to be robbed, but let's stay on one track for now. So, if he is in fact Majora, why is he divided like that? Well, one subtle detail can be found in the Song of Healing. When you play it, Link is surrounded by hearts, and Majora's Mask is heart-shaped. I wouldn't think anything of it, but a heart is a very specific shape for your mask to be in, and I feel like there is an intended connection there. I don't know if he played it for himself, but it is demonstrated by Link that that's entirely possible. But regardless, I think the Song of Healing was used to separate his dark half, but it was a two-way street. Many of Termina's citizens are copies of characters in Ocarina of Time, we know that, and a popular theory is that Kafei is actually Link's counterpart. For evidence, there's the fact that he has purple hair, and when they made Link Between Worlds, the same was true of Link's double in Lorule. That came out later, of course, but it helps establish a pattern. Secondly, like Link, Kafei had this big important life going on before he was forced to abandon it when he was turned back into a child. Romantically, he is engaged to Anju, and it is implied that Crimea has feelings for him. While most people would not think of Anju as a love interest in Ocarina, Malon totally is, with her father jokingly offering to let you marry her. In Twilight Princess, it is implied that Link is the descendant of the Link from Ocarina of Time. Considering that he lives on a farm, it is assumed that Ocarina's Link most likely did go on to marry Malon, but the same could work if he had hypothetically married Anju, as her profession isn't far off. He would just have to grow up some first. But that doesn't really matter either way. The point is that there are several thematic similarities between Link and Kafei. You also play as him briefly, and his side quest is the longest in the game. So if Kafei is Termina's Link, then why isn't he the one stepping up to the plate? Why isn't he freeing the giants and stopping the moon? I think it's because he doesn't have the spirit of the hero. The Fierce Deity mask is probably the most mysterious object in the game. We can see on the face of it what it is, it's Link, or rather the spiritual embodiment of what Link is. But why the hell is it in mask form, and why does Majora have it? And furthermore, why does he give it to you? Well, to answer those questions in order, I think that the Fierce Deity was sealed within a mask the same way that Majora's powers were, and I don't think it was necessarily an evil action. We have not seen the Song of Healing be used to hurt anyone, and I'm inclined to think it can't be. Instead, I think that this was beneficial to everyone. I don't know when they came up with the idea for Demise, but he didn't appear until Skyward Sword. But he isn't really necessary for this theory, as the line between Ganondorf and Ganon could already be drawn, hypothetically. But for simplicity's sake, we'll just use the now established lore as a framework. Basically, Zelda, Ganondorf, and Link are in a cycle of rebirth. Technically, Ganondorf has never truly died, evidenced by the fact that a male Gerudo has not been born since Ocarina of Time, but the process is more or less the same. Every few centuries he is revived. And Zelda and Link are reincarnated so they can battle again. In Buddhism, this is samsara, the cycle of rebirth, and the main goal of Buddhism is to escape it. Ganondorf is a part of the cycle because he is an incarnation of Demise, Zelda because she is an incarnation of the goddess Hylia, and Link because he has the spirit of the hero. In Termina, Hylia seems to not have a physical body, evidenced by how you can call out to her for help. By the way, I'm realizing that I shouldn't treat Hylia and the Goddess of Time as the same entity, as I don't think that's confirmed, but it doesn't really matter for this. But Majora and Kafei, who I'll be referring to as Termina's hero to cut down on confusion regardless of the validity of this theory, have their powers sealed in masks. I think that a long time ago, they realized that the only way to stop the cycle in their world was to seal away the deities that are truly at the heart of the conflict. It would even make sense of the weird statues licking the Triforce. Much like Lorule, Termina has rejected the old paradigm. This probably worked quite well too. There were clearly conflicts in Termina, but nothing like the moon falling in any recorded history we can see in the game. But with the spirit of the hero and the evil power of Majora sealed, there is no conflict to be had between them. But when Skull Kid took the mask, he accidentally restarted the cycle, and the power of Majora let loose only had one path forward: destroy. Maybe it's revenge on Termina for some forgotten crime, but I think that it simply doesn't know any other way, which is why it gives you the Fierce Deity mask as well. It needs an opponent that is part of the cycle. In Wind Waker, you don't actually play as the chosen hero. You aren't a reincarnation, you're just some guy. There is no hero because he was removed from the timeline back in Ocarina. Instead, you have to complete a series of trials to prove yourself worthy of becoming the hero, taking on the Master Sword, and starting the cycle again. In Majora's Mask, I think we do the same thing. In order to get the Fierce Deity mask, you have to collect every other mask in the game, which extrapolates to you helping everyone. By having all those masks, you prove that you are worthy of being the hero, or bad guy as it were, and you are given a mask containing the deity that would normally have been reborn in the current incarnation of Kafei. Now how did he literally have the mask? I'm tempted to just say game logic, as it doesn't make sense that he just has it on his person, but it's possible that it was already inside the moon. There is a moon on the Fierce Deity's armor, so the theming is pretty obvious, but Majora's Mask was likely hidden away in the Stone Tower Temple in the desert only accessible when the tower is flipped, so it stands to reason that the Fierce Deity mask was similarly hidden. And now we loop back to the original premise of the Happy Mask Salesman being Shigeru Miyamoto. All of this comes down to the basic story mechanic of bad guy versus good guy, which Majora feels compelled to fulfill because that is his purpose, just like Link and Ganon's in Hyrule. And as a being of pure malice, he doesn't have any greater goal than destruction, which is what we also see from Ganondorf when he is pushed to his limits and relies entirely on the power of Demise and the Triforce. Now all of this, I state with full clarity, is just my speculation. It really annoys me when a theory with the loosest basis gets treated as fact, and then every theory afterward is built on that, making a train of nonsense. But I spent a long time thinking about this one, and I do think I am onto something, even if the parts don't line up the way I thought. There is an adjacent theory that the Happy Mask Salesman is outright evil and has set up this whole conflict as an agent of chaos, but I just don't think I have the time for that. If this video does well, maybe I'll make another. Be sure to put your thoughts and wild conclusions in the comments down below.